Welcome to Biblical Foundations, a podcast of the Center for Biblical Studies at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. I'm your co-host, Jimmy Rowe, along with Dr. Andreas Köstenberger. Join us as we discuss issues in biblical scholarship for the church. Today we're talking to Tom Schreiner about current issues in New Testament studies, along with his contribution to New Testament scholarship. Shifting gears a bit, Dr. Schreiner, it seems like we're at a point in biblical scholarship with senior scholars beginning to retire and many younger scholars emerging in the field. What's your assessment of the future of conservative evangelical biblical scholarship?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing I'd want to say is I think my prophetic roles are very limited. I'm not sure, but overall, I'm encouraged. I think a lot of young evangelical scholars are doing outstanding scholarly work, and I learned from their monographs and their dissertations and their works that are coming out. So overall, I think evangelical biblical scholarship is doing an excellent job, but we can always improve. But I think we're far beyond the days where we said that scholarship doesn't matter. I suppose that if anything, perhaps there's a danger on the other side that we would overestimate the importance of scholarship. So,
yeah, I for one, Tom, have long appreciated your willingness to mentor younger scholars. On a personal note, even though we're not that far apart in age, I think I started out a bit later as a scholar than you did. And so I still remember when a fellow student and I first proposed the book idea to a publisher a couple decades ago now. One of the things they told us was that they'd be open to publishing the book if you were willing to co-edit it. Of course, you remember the book was Women in the Church, and it's gone through several editions, and I'm so grateful to you for your partnership and in this project of clarifying the teaching of 1 Timothy 2, 9-15, and for your friendship over the years. So I was thinking perhaps as we approach the end of this podcast, you could tell us what projects you're currently working on. I guess you touched on that a little bit earlier already, and what's just around the corner for you in terms of upcoming publications.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Andreas, it's been a delight to work on this book, Women in the Church, with you. Isn't that amazing? We've had a 1995 edition, I think a 2005 edition, a 2016 edition.
That's right.
So we're looking forward to 2025, right?
That's right.
We'll see what happens. But that's been a delight working with you. And I think that book's had a good impact. That's been encouraging to me. Right now, I just did a revision of my Pauline Theology, so that should be coming out. I don't know if it's going to come out late 2019 or 2020. I also did a significant revision of my 1st, 2nd Peter, and Jude in the which was in the NAC series. Now that series is being reissued as the Christian Standard Commentary. And again, as I did with Romans, I didn't do just a light revision. I integrated current scholarship. I read monographs, articles. I love 1st, 2nd Peter, and Jude. That was a thrilling project for me to work on. So that should be coming out. I guess it's not going to come out in 2019. Yeah, 2019 is almost over, isn't it? 2020 or 2021. I don't know what the schedule is for that. And then, as I mentioned, I'm working on this little book on Revelation. Bruce Ware and I are writing a book together on salvation in the series, Andreas, in which you and Greg Allison, I think, wrote on the Church or the Holy Spirit.
The Holy Spirit, yeah, and
the Holy Spirit.
And that book will be out, I guess, in June of 2020. So I knew,
I think your book's the first book in that series, isn't it?
That's right, first of 15.
Yeah. So Bruce Ware and I are working on this book on salvation, so that I don't know when that'll come out, sometime in the next, few years as well.
Well, Dr. Schreiner, Probably also interested. We've scheduled a podcast with your son Patrick, who is a professor of New Testament at Western Seminary, sometime in the next month. It must be a joy to see your son continuing your legacy of biblical scholarship. And in light of that, what advice would you give to younger biblical scholars as well as PhD students?
Yeah, well, it is great to see Patrick's work. I just finished reading. It's what a wonderful thing to learn from my son. I just
Mhm.
finished reading his book on Matthew, and I learned so much reading that book on Matthew. It's
Mhm.
just a fascinating book to read.
That's
So,
great.
um, I got what would I say to younger scholars? I think I'd say focus on the text, focus on explaining and unpacking the biblical text. Don't become preoccupied with fads, methodological fads.
Mhm.
Those come and go. And I think if you write on the text, your work will have staying power. But if you turn to methods that are mm, temporarily popular, I think your work is going to be not as useful. So and the other thing I'd actually say something spiritual. I think there's a call to us as scholars to stay close to the Lord, to uh, to walk with the Lord every day, to check our hearts. Are we doing this for the praise of people or for God's praise and honor and glory? We all face that temptation, and none of us is perfect in that regard. But to keep our relationship with God strong is, I think, is very vital. So I think it's very important for us as scholars to be vitally involved in our churches,
Mhm.
to be accountable to other believers, not to live an isolated scholarly life. I think that's a temptation for us as scholars.
I love that you brought that up, Tom. The importance of not just excellent scholarship in a technical sense, but also of godly scholarship. And certainly, I couldn't agree more. The importance of both practical scholarship and also reverent scholarship, and I see that in your work. Just reading through that portions of your Revelation commentary, especially the last paragraph of it, and my father just recently passed away, and so I was thinking already about matters of eternity, and just reading that paragraph, it just struck me that scholarship is so much more than just explaining the text. In the end, it's part of our hopefully a vibrant and growing relationship with the Lord. Um,
Amen.
yeah,
Amen.
I
Very well said.
remember seeing you have breakfast with Patrick at ETS in years past, Tom, and that as one who has four children and two sons, that spoke volumes to me. I think many of us might have thought that there were more important people to connect with at such meetings, but you obviously have made mentoring your son a priority. I think we're both at the stage of our ministry where much of our time is spent mentoring students and younger scholars. So maybe my final question to you would be, what would you say is different today from when you and I first started our teaching and writing ministries, and how might that affect the advice that we should give to those who want to enter a career of teaching and writing in biblical scholarship?
Yeah, the world, I think, has changed a lot. I mean, maybe a discouraging thing to younger people wanting to go into scholarship, but I think it's true. Is
Hmm.
it's I think it's harder to get a teaching position today than it
Yes,
was when we were
I agree.
uh, young scholars. So I think scholarship is still very important, but we say to everyone who applies into our doctoral program, uh, you ought to be open to pastoral ministry or to serving overseas. We can't guarantee you a teaching position in the current climate. So
Hmm.
they need to be open to that. Um, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but another thing I see that struck me recently is I think younger students are reading a bit less,
Hmm.
and I think it's because of social media. I think it's because of their phones. And I'm not criticizing them. That's a unique circumstance that you and I didn't face when we were young, and so I think it's incumbent upon younger scholars to be particularly disciplined. That's hard, isn't it? And not to give themselves too much to social media, but to do the kind of in-depth study, which is contrary to the cultural climate we're in, where yeah, as we know, people like to get on Twitter or whatever social media site and play gotcha, right?
Right.
Instead of doing careful thought. So I think there's a challenge for younger scholars today in a unique way to devote themselves to the biblical text.
Well, I think that's a fitting way to close our time, and I want to thank you, Dr. Schreiner. I think that's very instructive, even for myself as a PhD student. And so we thank you for joining us today at Biblical Foundations. And we hope this episode has been helpful for you, our listeners. Please join us again next time. Thank you for joining us today at Biblical Foundations. For more information, please visit the Center for Biblical Studies at Midwestern at cbs.mbts.edu. For further resources, please also visit biblicalfoundations.org. Please join us again next time at the Biblical Foundations podcast.